Welcome in, everybody. This is the Full Tilt Dynasty Podcast Network. We have the Full Tilt Devy podcast. This is episode 140 of the brand. I'm hyped. I hope you're hyped. We're going to get a couple things out of the way before we hand it off to the two hosts of the evening. First off, big cool announcement. We are officially signed with Manscaped. You will see that content coming soon. Big shout out to all the listeners and everyone doing the downloads and the comments. We couldn't do it without you. Second off, I just want to announce that episode 141 will be back on regular schedule this Saturday for the Fantasy Walkabout. Other than that, you guys are tired of hearing my scraggly voice. I want to hand it off to the two hosts of the evening. This is Andy and John.
Oh, thank you so much, Tommy T. We missed having you for a little bit, but as weird as it is to sit there for a minute while he talks, I do love hearing him. But I am Dynasty Coach A. I'm your faithful host, I guess, supposedly. And my fun fact of the day, I didn't really have one, but my fun fact of the day is my back is in terrible shape and I can barely walk. So that's not so much fun, but that's what I'm dealing with.
That comes with age.
Yeah, that sounds awful. But what's going on, everybody? I'm Andy. I'm at A*FF on Twitter. My fun fact: earlier this week on Trash Day, I found somebody throwing away like a vintage leather U of M golf bag. So I scooped that up. It was full of clubs. Sold it on eBay like a day later for $200. So I'm feeling pretty good about that. Yeah, I couldn't believe it.
That is awesome.
Look, we love that kind of thing. We love our guys reaping the benefits of chance. Well, look, great intros. We're ready to roll. We don't want to be those guys that say we have lots to get to, but we have lots to get to. First off, there is some news, of course, co-producing today. We do have Lucas. Lucas, hit us with the first tidbit of the day.
So first piece of news for today is that the Chiefs may be letting one of their offseason acquisitions walk, and Ronald Jones. How do you all see this affecting the other running backs for the Chiefs? In particular, how do you see this affecting Pacheco?
I mean, honestly, I don't really think that Ronald Jones is going to get cut when it's all said and done. I think that he is a much better player than Isaiah Pacheco, but there could be some things like special teams and receiving game that Pacheco has that obviously Ronald Jones does not have. I don't think that they have enough actual running backs on the team to really be cutting someone that has NFL talent. Once again, I'm not the biggest Rojo believer, but the dude can run fast straight. He can at least do that. Sometimes he fumbles, but I don't know. The more I talk about it, maybe I hate him, and he's just going to get cut.
Yeah, I've never been a Rojo guy, so I'm not going to sit here and trying to defend him. I do like Jerick McKinnon. I think he's a guy that could benefit from all this talk, but there's talk that maybe he's going to be let go. As far as Pacheco, I mean, he was pretty efficient as a runner behind a really bad Rutgers offensive line last year. So, he didn't have the stats, obviously, because, that team was so horrible. But he could be a sneaky grab late in dynasty drafts this year. And, if the injuries fall the right way, he might be he could end up being valuable down the stretch. So he's a guy to think about at least. But right now, I actually just grabbed Jerick McKinnon and Scott Fishbowl. So I think that he might be the one to own there if, anything should happen to Edwards-Helaire.
I think it's worth noting that when Clyde was struggling, Jet did produce in that role. So I think that's worth noting. You are gambling. Next up on the news calendar, John, I specifically wanted to be here for this. The man with one of the worst records in the second half of seasons got a massive extension. Playoff win Twitter was up in arms because he hasn't done shit in that regards, and the man just is both either broken every year or struggles down the stretch. Obviously, it's a big contract. Let's talk the contract before I send it to you guys. 5-year extension, average of $32 million in guaranteed money over that time. So he's not going anywhere. He will make $46.1 million in average across that contract. So he's in Arizona, stuck with Big Cliff, and we know how these big contracts hinder teams building. I want to throw it first to John. Initial reaction for this, and how do you see this playing out in Arizona?
Initial reactions, I loved every second of it because you want stability with your dynasty QBs, and I have a decent amount of Kyler. He's my QB1 in dynasty, and that's definitely a hot take, but I love Kyler. I really do. So I really feel like he's probably the only QB in the NFL right now that has a legit shot at 4K passing and 1K rushing. I don't know of any other QBs that can possibly do that. Josh Allen had his best.
There's only one that averaged those numbers up until he got hurt. Just saying.
Yeah, averaged. It's Kyler's a stud. Yes, the injuries have been definitely a concern, or something that we should be concerned about. But the play on when healthy has been the best in the league. Like literally QB1 when healthy. And they just upgraded, that everyone was talking about how DeAndre Hopkins was falling off last year. Well, that may be true. And they just added Hollywood Brown, who I'm so hyped about this year because of him moving over to a 1,000 times better QB and a better situation. So I think everything they're building around Kyler, and now that they have all of that behind them, I think they can just continue doing that. They added Trey McBride, one of my favorite tight ends. Like, I just feel like this offense is moving in the right direction. And Kyler's going to be a big part of that.
Yeah, I also love Trey McBride. Good name drop there. Ertz is obviously going to be the main guy at tight end there, but I do think with a couple years of development, McBride could be a huge tight end play down the stretch. But I've always been of the mindset that Kyler Murray's above average to good NFL quarterback, and he's a great to extraordinary fantasy quarterback. So if you're a fantasy manager of Kyler, you're ecstatic about this news. If you're a Cardinals fan, or if I was a Cardinals fan, I would be kind of trepidatious about this news. Like Tom was saying, this kind of hinders the ability to roster build and, build up that old line, the defense, the trenches, the parts of the game that aren't as sexy as quarterbacks and wide receivers and running backs, but are still necessary.
Looks like we lost Andy.
Yeah, we lost Andy. So,
like John, you have a bunch of Kyler Murray.
Oh, sorry, we lost you for a minute there, buddy. But yes,
I think I got out most of what I was going to say. So that's
I heard at the end. I do have quite a bit, not as much as I used to have. I sold off a little bit on some teams that I hadn't made the best decisions on, and I needed to fix. And one of the best ways to fix is to sell like a top QB, because you can get so many pieces when you're doing that. So. Obviously, you can build around the top QB, or you can sell them off and get a bunch. Like, imagine what you could get for Josh Allen right now. It's essentially the same thing with Kyler Murray, and that's basically what I did. But I do have, a few shares at the very least, and I'm always looking to, to get more. Although this news probably hindered that.
Yeah.
So one thing to note about Kyler Murray and his ups and downs of the season is that it seems to come at the expense of one, either passing and or rushing. We know Konami code quarterbacks break fantasy football, even in 6-point passing touchdown leagues. Something to note that this year he only had 58 designed runs and only ran 30 scrambles. So his rushing yards are way down. His rushing touchdowns came down to earth. There was a torrid stretch at the beginning of the year, but this seems to be what happens with Kingsbury as well. So we will see what happens with Kyler. Take note. Great start. We're off and running. Here's a clip from last week's show. When we come back, the boys are going to get into a bit of a Big Ten and Pac-12 preview. Sit tight. You are a featured member of the Bulletproof Discord. You are, of course, the analytics man over here at the Full Tilt Dynasty podcast. I refer to you for everything when it comes to these things.
Bad news for the Full Tilt Dynasty podcast.
You're definitely out there on the Twitter streets fighting battles for the numbers. Not a lot of got that dog in him coming from your Twitter account, which we love.
That's the funniest line. I love that dog in him.
Shout out to the people who got that dog in them.
I use that unironically all the time because it's my favorite line.
So, and of course, we also have Billy, who is also an absolute genius. These two men are very intelligent human beings, and I just pressed the button. So these two gentlemen are
Billy's
going
got
to
that
educate
dog
me.
in him, baby.
He's got that
Damn
dog
straight.
in him.
Damn
Look,
straight.
unbelievable. I love that sentence. He's got that dog in him. It's one of my favorite. We're kicking off. We did news and notes. We are going to go with Heisman Hail Mary. This is a bit of an over-under here. Lucas, take it away.
All right. So on the over-under, we have been doing team win-losses. This week, coming to you with Heisman over-unders. And we are going to be doing Cameron Rising at plus 8,000. How do you all feel about that?
Yeah. So basically, I was, looking at the Heisman odds. Obviously at the top you've got guys that are pretty much, you could say are favorites, obviously. So like CJ Stroud and the Bryce Young, who obviously won it last year. But the reason I put Rising on here, I wanted to, pick some of these guys with longer odds, like greater than plus 5,000 odds. He's an older guy. He's playing his 5th season for Utah this year. He was a starter last year for the first time. Had a super efficient year. He completed 64% of his passes. He only had 20 TDs, but he did finish 6th in the country in QBR, which is pretty incredible, and also added 500 yards on the ground. And 6 TDs on the ground. And he led that team to the Pac-12 title. But like when I'm looking at the Heisman history and kind of the science of the Heisman winners, just going back to 2010, so the last 12 winners, 10 of them have been quarterbacks. And since the institution of the college football playoff in 2014, 7 of the 8 winners have been on teams that made it to the college football playoff. So obviously people are saying, Ohio State, Alabama are probably going to make the college football playoff, which makes sense as to why their quarterbacks are plus 200, plus 400 respectively for odds. But the last 2 teams, are kind of a toss-up. Everyone obviously expects Georgia to try and compete to be back there. But, Stetson Bennett isn't really a video game numbers type guy in the pass game. So he doesn't seem like any sort of at risk to win the Heisman. Other guys from like the ACC who could potentially, win that conference. You've got Tyler Van Dyke. You've got Devin Leary. You've got DJ Uiagalelei. And then from the Big 12, you've got Dylan Gabriel. They've all got favorable odds at plus 3,000. But then the Pac-12 really seems to be kind of like an open race. Everyone seems to think USC with Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams there, who has plus 600 odds to win the Heisman. I've already spoken at length about how I think USC is vastly overrated this year. And then Oregon, obviously, they have Bo Nix, who, again, kind of a bit of a game manager, not really going to break the stat book. And then there's Utah. The Utes do have probably the toughest schedule in the Pac-12. They open against your Gators, John, in the Swamp, which is going to be a tricky game. Yeah. But, Billy Napier's first game, there's probably going to be some jitters. Anthony Richardson's first game as a starter. It's a new team. So I think that's a game that an experienced team like Utah, even them being on the road, it's going to be a crazy atmosphere. I think they could go in there and, put up some points early and potentially win that game. And then obviously they have to play Oregon and USC later on in the season, which won't be easy. But if they do run that table and Utah ends up winning the Pac-12 and makes the college football playoff, I think Rising, who's a super efficient quarterback who has the potential, I think, to get. So last year he had 26 touchdowns. Their running back Tavian Thomas had 21 touchdowns total on the season on only 204 attempts, just on the ground alone. So that's like over a 10% TD rate. So there's definitely going to be some regression there. And I think Rising, if he can get like 10 or potentially even 12 of those touchdowns that Tavian Thomas was getting last year, and inch towards that 40 total touchdowns. And then, like obviously, like I said, Utah runs the table. I think he's in the mix for the Heisman. So at plus 8,000, I think that's a nice bet.
Yeah, my fun fact of the day should have been that I drafted Cameron Rising at 15-7 in my C2C draft that I'm in right now.
Nice.
So I definitely am hoping that he ends up being the Heisman, because that would be amazing for my squad. And actually, I mean, if there was a position that was lacking in on my team, it would be QB. So him getting the Heisman, or even playing it somewhat of that level, would be very nice. But I mean, I will admit, like, the caveat here was that we were trying to pick somebody over, plus 5,000. So, we weren't picking any of like the obvious guys, obviously. So once we got into this range, it does get really tough, and I really don't mind having Rising there. I think that he can take a step forward. If I remember correctly, last year was his first year starting. I believe he went to the Manning Academy and got praise, high praise there. So, there's reasons to believe that he could take a step forward. And then, the TD regression from the running game is a great point as well, because, 10% touchdown rate for anyone is really damn high. So I do like that choice. And then I actually chose for mine, and once again, I don't necessarily think this is going to happen, but we're playing with high odds here, and I said, once again, going to who we think are going to be in the college playoffs. I went with the Heisman winner, Trevion Henderson, and I think it could be kind of what you were just talking about. What if he has one of those lucky years where he ends up getting like 25 touchdowns or something, just everything works out to where, like, he had 15 rushing touchdowns last year. What if he bumps that up to 20? And then what if he gets like, 8 or however many receiving touchdowns, and it just works out that way? I don't think it's necessarily likely. I don't even know how many running backs have actually gotten the Heisman, in the past decade or so. Probably not that many, but I do believe in his talent. And so, whether or not he's Heisman level, I guess is a completely different story. But I do know, I do actually believe that he is probably the best running back talent in college right now.
Yeah, that's not. Yeah, I mean, you're not going out on a limb saying that either. He's incredible, and I think we're all on the same page that Ohio State's probably going to come out of the Big Ten and make the college football playoff. So if you can get anyone on that team, I think JSN's got some pretty long odds too. That's another guy who could, maybe just be the beneficiary of that offense, and just get a ton of touchdowns.
I think he was right at plus 5,000, but
okay.
So like, I guess technically we could have chosen him, or like it would have been cheating. I don't know, but regardless, Devontae Smith was the first in 20 something years to win as a receiver, and so I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go with at least a little bit higher of a chance with Trevion there.
Right, with running back you had Derrick Henry, and then Mark Ingram, all within like the last 15 years, so it's not as uncommon, I guess.
Right, exactly. And I mean, to throw out another name, and it's not someone that I actually believe in, but when I was looking at the list, it was probably the next believable name as far as who could actually do it, and it was Anthony Richardson. I don't believe in his talent. I don't believe that he's going to take like a huge leap forward, that people are talking about him becoming this, top 3 QB in the class or anything like that. But we do know that he is going to run like hell, and he has that like Cam Newton body style, and and like he can take a beating and all that kind of stuff. So it wouldn't be that insane to be like, oh, he had 1,400 yards rushing or something like that, and 3,000 passing, and Florida did way better. I don't believe it. I don't think it's going to happen, but I guess that would be the next most likely one, in my opinion.
I'm surprised you don't know this, John, but the last time a running back won the Heisman was 2015, and Derrick Henry won the Heisman with 378 first place votes, 277 second place votes, 144 third place votes, beating Christian McCaffrey by just under 300 votes. To put that into perspective, the season he had to have to attain this was on a 14-1 Alabama team that won the national championship, rushed for 2,219 yards, 28 touchdowns. That's the type of season you're going to need if you want to win the Heisman as a running back.
I love it. I love that you brought it up. And I did know that he won it. I did not know that he was the last one to win.
Yeah, absolutely. Next up.
So, we talked about that, and I think those are probably like two of the more realistic ones, even though I don't think that they're all that realistic. But that's why we're betting plus 8,000. You're betting $100 and getting $8,000. You're feeling pretty good at the end of the day. But the main part of tonight is we're going to get into some Big Ten and Pac-12 previews. I don't know if Tommy T and Lucas have another break for us before we get into that or not.
We do have another clip from last week's episode. When we come back, it is preview time.
There's a phrase that I believe it started as from Jordan McNamara, but a lot of people have said it now, which is don't buy wide receivers on credit. This is something that I've very newly brought into my strategy. I would not have done this like a year ago, but don't buy wide receivers on credit essentially means like don't pay future draft picks for future wide receiver production, right? So when we think about what is the value of an AJ Brown
like that,
or whoever, we can use any wide receiver, but I'll use AJ Brown, right? His total value is an amalgamation of what we think he's going to do this current year and then what we think he's going to do in the future years.
That was Jacob on our episode on VORP, which you can go and catch over at the True North Fantasy Football YouTube page, the Full Tilt Dynasty YouTube page, and you can also go to truenorthffb.com/Full Tilt to get the full episode. I learned a lot. What's next, gentlemen?
All right, so we have, let's go ahead and start off with our Big Ten preview, probably the more exciting one, at least a little bit here. We just got done talking last week or last show about how, the Pac-12 is kind of dying, but, I guess we've had a little bit of news since then that, like there could be some merging and things going on, but once again, we'll wait and see what actually happens with all that. But, Andy, why don't you go ahead and start us off with your favorite Devy prospect for 2022 from the Big Ten?
Yeah, so I put this in our show sheet too. Like the word favorite was open to interpretation. So I took a homer pick here and went with my boy from Wisconsin, Braylon Allen. Or I should say man from Wisconsin now that he's no longer only 17 years old, which we heard a million times last season. But he's the true sophomore. Derrick Henry-sized beast at 6'2", 240 pounds, 1,200 total yards last year with 12 TDs. But he's really only the primary running back for them in, I would say, 9 games and only eclipsed 20 carries in, I believe, 4 of those games. He does have an expensive price tag right now. He's at an ADP of 12, I believe, last time I checked, which is RB5. So he's a first-round draft pick in some of your drafts here. So I'm not necessarily advocating you draft him there, especially if my guy Nick Singleton's available. Definitely take him. But he could easily be a top 5 Devy pick next year if he can show us some sort of receiving floor. I think that's the big problem as of right now. He only had about a 2% reception yard market share as a freshman, which, that's basically nothing. If he can get that number closer to like 5%, which isn't asking a lot, especially in the Wisconsin offense. That's only like, maybe 100 yards receiving. It's a little more than that, but you know what I'm saying. And the rushing volume, I think, is going to increase because Ches Malusi, who was kind of the 1B/1A, I guess, depending on what game you're looking at, running back for them last year, he's still recovering from an ACL tear. So I think Braylon could be in for a monster year.
I definitely agree, and I have him as my Devy running back 5. So I'm right there with you, or maybe even ahead of you, depending on what you said. I feel like it might be a little risky with the guy that transitioned from linebacker and doesn't really have the receiving profile. But we just got done talking, or Tommy T got done talking about how much I love Derrick Henry, and guess he was like a very similar comp here, at least looking pretty close. So
right,
and obviously, and my ranking doesn't have to do with my love for Derrick Henry. He's doing a lot of the things that I like, we've talked about in the past, like breakaway run rate and stuff like that. Points per touch, PPR points per touch, just being a baller, like in general. And so, some guys, like we can always work on the receiving part of the game. Maybe that's not going to be part of his game, but some guys are just that damn good. And he seems to be that kind of guy.
Fun fact, his 24/7 profile still has him listed as a linebacker. So that's a fun thing.
Yeah, I remember being in a chat.
Algier.
Right. I remember being in a chat last year, a group chat, and there were some Devy boys talking about him, and somebody was like, "Oh, should I trade away Braylon Allen for this player?" And I wish I could remember who the player was. And I just remember them talking about how he was a linebacker and he was a convert, and just they didn't trust him and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying they were wrong not to trust it, but now they got to be kicking themselves at this point.
right.
We have a quick question here from the chat. Andy hopping in like he does. Shout out, Andy. We love you. Henry is oh my God, I butchered that. I'm so sorry. Henry is a once in a lifetime running back. Is there a risk of every bigger back being comped there when a lot of them end up like Lendale White? We'll start with Andy Starr.
Well, I'll just say Lendale White had like a season and a half of like decent NFL production. So, I mean, it's not if you get an RB2 or RB1 season out of a guy, obviously if you're taking him in the first round, you'd expect a little bit more. But yeah, I think that is the risk here. And if he does end up being Lendale White, then you're kind of, sinking some cost there. Like I said, if he can get 5% market share in that receiving game, I think that's going to leave a lot of people feeling a little bit more comfortable with him. And it's not going to take much. Like Wisconsin doesn't run a very complicated offense. Like all he needs to do is run a few screen plays. He doesn't need to like have a positive ADOT or anything. He can just, get some of those short catches and turn them into some, 7-8 yard gains. He's gonna, that's all you really ask out of the guy. And it's not a complicated thing, but some guys just don't do it. And it's not, a lot of people think, Wisconsin never uses their running backs in the passing game. But, you look at Melvin Gordon and Jonathan Taylor, those guys didn't have huge reception numbers, but they had that market share percentage that, was above 5%, which, you need to sort of feel comfortable. And like I said, this is the Wisconsin offense. It doesn't need to be a huge total because they really don't pass the ball that much.
Yeah. And I actually, that's why I kind of like said that I wasn't making my ranking on Braylon Allen because of Derrick Henry or even my opinion or whatever. Like everything I do ranking wise is at least based off of my model. And, that's just looking at the metrics. There's no biases involved or anything like that. So that's why I kind of wanted to mention that, because I don't, even as much as I love Derrick Henry, I'm not comping him to Derrick Henry. And in fact, like I was not I didn't have a model back then, and maybe I could go back and add Henry into the model just to see like where he would end up being. I have a feeling he would be much higher than Braylon Allen. Yeah, exactly. I have a feeling that he would be much higher than Braylon Allen, and so like I have Braylon Allen at 5, but that doesn't he's not in the same tier as Bijan, Travion Henderson, like those guys. He's not even in the same tier as Jahmyr Gibbs and players like that. So I have him in tier 3. I like the player a lot. I think he's going to be a quality NFL running back. I don't think he's the 101 in 2023 drafts or anything like that,
No.
I just want to point out after what Andy said about Lendale White and how you're happy with that, his best season is arguably 2008, where he rushed for 773 yards and 15 touchdowns, and he only hauled in 5 receptions, putting him below Damian Harris territory in points per game. And his next season was 1,110 yards with only 7 touchdowns and 20 receptions, again putting him in hella low RB2 territory. I believe it is a risk with bigger backs. Fun facts.
Yeah, but I also think that there's something to be said about him transitioning from linebacker to running back, that there's a lot of room for him to grow. And so while we can't guarantee it's going to happen, I think you have to give him the benefit of the doubt, and that's what I'm doing at this point.
I mean, I'll just jump. I mean, teams need RB2s as well, right? You need to have those quality flex plays. You can't have all studs here, right? And obviously, you're not going to hit on every single player. And I hate to be the guy that's like defending Braylon Allen. I love him because he's from Wisconsin, but if you get like a good quality, 1,000-yard season, 15 touchdown season, back to back like that, I think you're pretty happy with a pick at the back of the first round there. Worse things could definitely happen.
Hindsight is always 20/20, but we're learning stuff here today, and that's what it's all about. Gentlemen, what is up next?
All right, so I guess we'll go ahead and dive into my favorite for the Big Ten, and it's somebody we talked about recently, and it was Blake Corum. And I feel like I didn't necessarily go with the homer pick like you did. I wanted to go with somebody I felt like was being undervalued, but also I have highly ranked. And so that's why I went ahead and chose Blake Corum. I don't think he's the best player in the Big Ten or anything like that. So like you said, there's a little bit of like ambiguity with the word favorite, but I think he's my favorite player to draft at value. And so that's kind of why I went with him. And if you ask me, like his only knock is height. Like I can't find another knock that people have for him besides the fact that he's 5'8". And on my other podcast, the Devy Devotional, we recently talked with Brandon Lejeune, and he was talking about how he did a whole film series on Donovan Edwards, and he just doesn't believe he has vision. And he like, obviously it's something he can work on and get better, but as a freshman he just really didn't have like what you would want to see from like a workhorse back. And so we look at like what Hassan Haskins did last year. He had almost 1,500 scrimmage yards. So if we assume that Donovan Edwards is going to take a step forward, I think we can also assume that Blake Corum is going to take a step forward, and they can both do well. I'm not saying that and I talked in a previous pod that I have them back to back in my rankings. Like I'm not truly saying one's going to be that much better than the other, but I don't think a lot of people have it that way. And so when it's all said and done, I think that they can both take a step forward, but I really do think that Blake Corum is the better running back as is right now. It's just that he's 5'8", but the thing is, he has a 30.44 BMI. So it's not like he's this teeny tiny guy or anything. Meanwhile, Donovan Edwards has a 27.42 BMI. So the only thing that he has going for him is that he's 6 feet tall, but he doesn't have at least as a freshman or going into a sophomore year, he doesn't have that frame or that build quite yet. He could, work his way into it. And I'm not freaking out about it, obviously, or I wouldn't have him directly behind Corum. But I just think when it's all said and done, you're looking at a guy that averaged 98 scrimmage yards per game last year, 1.2 PPR points per touch. And once again, that was with Hassan Haskins having 1,500 scrimmage yards and doing what he did as well and getting drafted, albeit late, but getting drafted in the NFL. He's going off the board as the running back 18 in June ADP and 55th overall. And I have him a lot higher than that. So, what do you think about Corum, and how do you feel about me having him as my favorite player here?
When was it, a couple shows ago? Yeah, I'm on record. I'm with you. I think Corum is the safer play in that Michigan backfield. I think the price is, fine for him. It's not like egregious. You're not over, it's not like you're spending a second round pick on him or anything. So, and like what you mentioned, the BMI, which I think is probably more important for a running back than just height. I think BMI is more important than height. And he's a better pure runner. Like we talked about on the show, he's more capable runner. The only thing that people lean on with Donovan Edwards is that his receiving ability, which is propped up by that 10 reception game against Maryland. So who has, I think their pass defense is ranked like 100th. So yeah, I'm not in on Donovan Edwards yet. He's got the 5-star pedigree, which obviously people love to see. But I'm going to talk about another guy who coming up here. This 5-star take lock happens quite a bit in the Devy game, where like, oh, it's going to happen this year. People think it's going to happen this year. And, if you can get out ahead of it before people start to realize that those guys are swings and misses, then you should be doing that. But, Donovan Edwards could still hit. I'm not saying like he's a bust already or anything, but I'm with you that I think Corum is the safer pick.
And since I'm obligated to talk about how much I hate Tank Bigsby on every single podcast that I do, I'm going to go ahead and just say that he's my favorite. Blake Corum is my favorite because I have him over Tank Bigsby, which is probably a pretty hot take for most people.
That's pretty spicy.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to mention it, because I also have to bring up Tank on every single pod that I do. But why don't we go ahead and get into our player that we think will gain value, our riser of the Big Ten. Who do you got?
So I went way down the ADP list here, and I was looking at Chase Brown, running back out of Illinois, 5th-year senior, just barely eclipsed 1,000 yards last year. But he does have some pass catching ability with a 7.5% reception market share. Only had 5 TDs. But I'm of the belief that he's going to have a positive regression there. He only had a 3% TD rate, which is pretty low. He does share the backfield with a bowling ball in Josh McCray, 240-pound beast, who also had over 100 carries. But Brown is obviously the more dynamic runner. Obviously McCray is this big bruiser. And I think the most important thing for the offense is they got a QB upgrade with Tommy DeVito, Syracuse transfer. Now, DeVito's not like an elite quarterback by any stretch of the imagination, but he's at least had a full season where he's completed more than 60% of his passes, which I can't say the same about Illinois' quarterback for the last 3 years, Brandon Peters. So I do think the offense as a whole will be better and more likely to score more than only 24 TDs, which is all they scored last in the entire season, which I talked about. Like Tavian Thomas, a running back for Utah, had 21 last year by himself. So 24 is pretty anemic as far as offenses are concerned. And if he's been improving every single year. And I think, if he keeps showing that he can carry the load, I think has a chance to be a day 3 pick in next year's draft, which doesn't sound like amazing or anything, but where he's getting drafted outside of, I think his ADP's 208 right now, RB 74. So basically undrafted. He's more of a C2C guy. But I think he could end up garnering some NFL value if he gets put in the right situation.
Yeah, I like it. I was planning. I want to say I was trying to go out of my way to get Chase in my C2C draft that's going on right now. But I was kind of looking at him, considering him, during certain rounds, and he ended up going before I was willing to take him. But I ended up taking Josh McCray. So maybe I do have a problem with these big boys. But it's but I just wanted to get a piece of that offense because I like you said, I do think that they could take a step forward. Obviously, injuries can happen, and if an injury did happen to Chase, then McCray could take a step forward. But Chase was a better running back last year. There's no doubt about it. Now, obviously, he was a senior compared to, I believe, a sophomore for McCray, or maybe even a freshman. But you might not be able to necessarily compare the players per se. But at the same time, I'd say Chase is probably the better player, the better choice at this point. And like you said, going as late as he's going, I definitely love the fact that he could gain some value because. He had 1,000 yards or something like that. Like if he could take a step forward, get into 12, 13, 1,400 yards and, multiple touchdowns and all that kind of stuff, I think he can at least rise a little bit, get into that 50 range, get into, 4th, 5th, 6th round pick, that kind of thing. And at least he's getting drafted. So I like the pick. I have no issues with it whatsoever. Let's go ahead and dive into mine now. And it's a player that I've talked about on a lot of pods. I don't know if I've talked about it on this pod or not. You can remind me if I have, Andy, but it's Dante Damas. And I love me some... I always say Damas. I think some other people say Demas. I don't know. I don't even know what it is. I don't care. All I know is the dude's a baller. And he broke out as a sophomore with a 31.4% market share in that offense. Then 2020 happened. And they only played 5 games. He didn't do all that much. He had 325 yards and 3 touchdowns, I think. it was. But, small sample, God only knows what could have happened that year had they actually played a full season. And then in 2021, unfortunately, we have a small sample again, except for this time he completely blew the hell up and had 507 yards and 3 touchdowns in 5 games before he had a disgusting knee injury. Don't watch the video if you're squeamish, because it's pretty gross. But I kind of thought he was done at that point. Like, I thought he might actually retire from football and everything. But everything I've seen and read and heard is saying that he's going to be back, and he's going to be back fully healthy. And I've also heard from multiple people in the industry that they think that Davis would have been a first-round pick had he not gotten hurt last year. So while that might not necessarily be the case anymore, I think he can be a day 2 guy, at the very least. And so, I feel like he's being kind of forgotten because he's going off the boards as the wide receiver 49 in June ADP. And just to put it in perspective, I have him as my wide receiver 21. So I have him substantially higher. And I think that, he can, like I said, I mean, at the very least, I think he could be a 3rd-round pick in this upcoming draft, assuming health and all that. Like, I guess we can never, guarantee anything with an injury of that nature. It could very well, just be something he never quite comes back from. But I'm hearing good things, and so I love the player, and I'm just going to hope for the best at this point.
For the record, you have not talked about Dante Demas on this pod, but I have before you graced us with your college football brilliance a couple weeks ago. And I basically said exactly the same thing you did. First round pick, potentially. I think Sports Illustrated, a few people have already done their way too soon mock drafts, and he's there. He's potentially a top 20 pick. And yeah, I mean, I think it was our second or third show. I talked about, how ridiculous his yards per team pass attempt were, his market share. He's in the same receiving group as another guy I'm going to talk about here shortly. Who probably should be considered better than him, but Dante Demas has shown time and time again that he's the best receiver there. Obviously the big question mark is the knee, and if he's going to be able to run on that. Because I was talking to a big wide receiver guy who works over at Campus to Canton. He's had him clocked at 21.5 miles per hour, which equates to basically sub 4.5 pretty reliably. So he's a speedster. But yeah, the big question mark is can he recover from that horrific knee injury, which you're not exaggerating when you say that it's disgusting.
It was bad. I can't remember his name right now. Was it Zach Thomas for the Bears that had a very similar injury, and he basically retired after that. So he's lucky. Zach Miller, thank you. I knew it was Zach, but yeah. So I think that he's probably lucky that he's young. Maybe it wasn't nearly as bad. Somebody somewhere, I can't remember if I heard it on a pod or whatever, said it was only an ACL tear, and that would be the wildest thing I've ever seen if it ended up only being an ACL tear. I cannot imagine that's actually the case, the way that I saw what I saw. But enough about Damas here. I think we need to get into the players that we think are going to lose value. We're probably going a little long here, and so we'll go a little quicker with the Pac-12 guys. But why don't you go over who we think are going to lose value real quick before we jump over there?
This is a good segue because we just talked about Demas. So the guy that I think is going to lose value is Raheem Jarrett. He's just simply underwhelmed as the 5-star coming into Maryland in 2020. He hasn't had a season with over 2 yards per team pass attempt yet. His weighted dominators only been around 20% last season and his freshman year, despite Demas missing more than half of those games last year. And he's just not going above and beyond like what you'd expect a top 10 player from his position, which is where he's getting drafted right now. ADP 29, wide receiver 9. So you expect more from him, especially a 5-star guy who's going to a, I guess, quote unquote, smaller school in Maryland. He should at the very least be commanding 30% market share in his second season. And I talked about take lock earlier with 5 stars. This is a bad case of take lock. It's not as bad as Julian Fleming from Ohio State. People were still drafting him high last year when he did absolutely nothing. Jarrett's at least put some stats in the books, but I think he's locked in as a day 3 pick right now. unless he really just explodes next year. And that's even if he decides to go pro next year, which I think there's a chance that he doesn't even do that.
Yeah, I agree. I have him behind Damus. I've always had him behind there, and I remember talking to some people, talking about Damus and Raheem Jarrett, and people were saying, "Oh, well, Jarrett's just going to take over, and like Damus is going to be an afterthought," and that never happened. Like even after he got hurt, it was still Damus. So I agree with you 100%. I'm much lower on Raheem Jarrett. He's going. I just did a Devy mock with the Devy Royale boys, and I want to say that he went in like the second round, and I was like, nope, not doing that. But I'm going to go over my faller very quickly so we can get into the Pac-12 boys, and it's Marvin Harrison Jr. This is not me saying that he's terrible. It is not me saying that he's bad by any means. Please do not turn off the pod. Please do not turn off your phone or anything like that. I think that obviously JSN is better, and I think that Egbuka is better. So when it's all said and done, I think he's going to be the third the third receiver on this team. And the small sample that we have from last year, everyone seems to be kind of focused on the multi-touchdown game, and like that's why they think he's going to be a stud. But don't chase touchdowns. Like we say that on like every pod I've ever been on. Like don't chase touchdowns. Chase what they're chase the metrics. Chase what they're actually doing.
Very relevant Gabe Davis take there, John.
Ooh, that's very true. But what we do know is, like I've talked about it on other pods, is like even simple stats like yards per reception can tell us a story of who a player is. And if you look at Marvin Harrison Jr., he had 12.6 yards per reception in that offense. I think that's right, and it was the lowest of like any of the receivers last year. And even though it was a small sample, I think that's kind of who he is. I don't think he's an explosive receiver. I don't think he's going to be this, this like game-changing player. So if the only thing that people have is that he gains some weight and that he's going to be a big body, well, I'm sorry, but JSN and Egbuka are just going to run all over that. So, you look at Egbuka, who had like 20.9 yards per reception, and once again, a small sample. I'm not expecting that to continue, but just think about in a very similar situation, you had almost a 10 yards per reception difference for these players. And I just feel like one is so much more explosive and exciting than the other that when it's all said and done, Harrison could fall a little bit. And, because he's going as like wide receiver 6 or something like that right now. So I just feel like he could be, wide receiver 10 or something around there when it's all said and done. I'm not saying he's going to be like wide receiver 50 or anything like that. So everyone take a deep breath. Everyone calm down.
Yeah, I think I'm with you with Egbuka being better. Egbuka can play anywhere on the field. He's a better yak guy. Marvin Harrison's probably faster. He can get down the field better, but he still did. I mean, like you said, it's a limited sample size. His ADOT was still under 10 yards last year. So, but yeah, it's Ohio State. You want their starting receivers. They've got like 55 stars there. So anyone that's starting for Ohio State as a receiver is probably going to go pro and be a day 1 or 2 draft pick. So
yeah, easily. Yeah. I just think he's going to fall a little bit. And when you're talking about like the top 5 picks, then falling to 8 is a pretty substantial difference, or something like that. So, it sounds crazy, but I'm just talking about him dropping a little bit. Nothing too wild. But let's go ahead and dive into the Pac-12 preview, and let's do this quickly because, we don't have a lot of time left. Do we have another break here?
Good for time. Go ahead.
Ooh, we're good for time. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive into. I guess I'll go ahead and start since I had you start on all of them for the Big Ten there, and I'll start with my favorite Devy prospect, and it is actually Zach Charbonnet. I really feel like he should have come out last year. I don't know why he didn't. Maybe because of the transfer and everything. Like the teams were saying, like we need to see another year of it. But when you look at like the numbers that he put up and the running back class that we had, it was like he could have easily been, like in the mix there at the very least, probably better than an Isaiah Spiller when it was all said and done as far as like draft capital and stuff like that. So I kind of question that if he thought he could better it or if like the NFL teams were telling him not to do it. but he has great size. He breaks off big runs, like a 7.6% big time run rate. He showed his abilities in the receiving game. He had over 20 receptions last year, once he got over to UCLA, and he averaged 110 scrim yards per game. Obviously the knocks are he's a senior, he's transferred and things like that, but I think he's going to take another step forward this year. They're talking about big things going on in the offense. They're talking about him taking a step forward as a player. And so when it's all said and done, while he's not going to be the top tier or anything like that, I do think that he can easily be in the mix for a draftable running back.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't know why when guys like Brian Robinson were getting drafted on day 2, you wonder, like, why is Zach Charbonnet not here? He's clearly better than a lot of these guys, at least, we think that. But I guess that kind of, put question marks in my mind about him. I think he's obviously going to have a great season this year. There's no more Britton Brown there. He's going to get the bulk of the carries. But I'll be honest, I just recently traded him in a Campus Canton league. I got Kadarius Toney for him, which, Kadarius Toney's not anything great, but the way that this running back class is stacked this year for 2023 with Bijan and Zach Evans, and you hate Tank Bigsby, but, Sean Tucker, Jahmyr Gibbs, best case scenario, Charbonnet's RB5, I think, depending on, maybe he has a huge season, but he's a great player, I think. Another previous 5-star too. But yeah, I think he probably should have just came out this year, but maybe there was agents or scouts saying, you need to wait and do another year. So I guess we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and just for perspective, because it was kind of tough making these choices for the Pac-12. I don't know about you, but I didn't really fall in love with a lot of these players.
No,
but so like he's my RB29 in Devy. Yeah. So like I'm not saying that I absolutely love Zach Charbonnet. I'm just saying that for the Pac-12, I guess he's my favorite player. I don't have a lot of players that I love for the Pac-12, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think I'd even have him a little higher than RB29, but maybe not that.
Yeah,
much higher,
I've moved quite a bit of quite a few of the younger players ahead of him and things that like you said he seems to just have kind of missed his time. Like he should have come out this year and he didn't, and so now he probably screwed himself. So right. I think he can get drafted. I like the player for C2C purposes. I think he's going to be a pretty great player this year, but I don't know that he's going to get like this amazing draft capital because there's just going to be too many bodies to fill, too many teams to fill, like that kind of thing.
All right, well, I'll take it over then for my favorite player, who you completely stabbed me in the back and took the same guy as your guy who's going to lose value, which I'm sure you'll.
I wasn't sure if you saw that or not.
But I went with Cameron Ward. Again, we're taking the word favorite pretty loosely here and interpreting it how we'd like. So I chose Ward because I think he's just going to be a ton of fun to watch next year. Not going to go too deep in the stats. I think we've touched on that in the show previously. But this entire situation just kind of has shades of like Western Kentucky last year with Bailey Zappi, where the QB, the wide receiver, the head coach all make the FCS to FBS jump together and dominate. And that formula obviously worked for Western Kentucky and Zappi, who Zappi ends up breaking like every FBS touchdown record, gets drafted in the 4th round against ahead of stud quarterback Sam Howell, who just ruined my life last year. But I still believe Sam Howell has a chance.
Too soon.
I know. But so with Zappi, I think what had a lot of people excited is he played some FBS schools before he made the jump while he was at, I forget where Zappi went previously when he was in FCS, but Ward, while he was at Incarnate Word last year, did play Texas State, which isn't like the cream of the crop for FBS, but he did end up beating that school, which anytime an FCS school beats FBS, that's kind of a big upset, or at least an upset, I would think. He threw for 376 yards and 4 touchdowns in that game. And I just think the offense is going to be a ton of fun to watch. They're going to put up some crazy numbers. So I'm all aboard it. The train here, even as his ADP, it's been going up ever since, people get more and more familiar with it. I think his ADP's 61, QB 13 right now. I think I have a little bit higher than that. Last rankings I did, I had him, just inside my top 10 QBs. I think he's just going to put up some crazy video game numbers.
Yeah, I think that's the problem. Is it's not necessarily the player. It's not necessarily like what he's going to do this year or anything like that. It's just the ADP. It's getting wild for me. Like if we're talking about Campus to Canton once again, then that's completely different. Like he's going to put up some probably pretty prolific numbers, but I don't I don't trust taking that step. Like, yeah, Bailey Zappi did it. That doesn't mean every FCS quarterback's going to take a step forward and go into the Pac-12 and do it. Now the Pac-12 is the Pac-12. We don't expect them to have amazing defenses or anything like that. But I still think when I'm looking for somebody to be that guy that's going to take that step from FCS to FBS, I want him to have put up like literally amazing numbers and in FCS, and he put up like good numbers in FCS. Like if you look at it, he threw the ball 590 times. There's not too many QBs that even do that in college right now. CJ Stroud threw 441 times last year. Bryce Young threw 530. So, you're talking about an extra 60 pass attempts, almost like a game or two more than what those boys threw. And they were in bowl games and stuff like that. So I wonder, how many more games were even involved in those stats. But, the yards per attempt weren't that high. Like the only thing that he really had was he had a pretty decent touchdown to interception rate, which I'll give him. At least he's safe with the ball, like no issues with that. I just wonder how much that the step forward is going to take, and then are his numbers going to drop because of that? Being that he's not like this amazing prolific passer at the lower level. If he's throwing 7 yards a pass in Pac-12, like that's nothing. That's not somebody that we're going to be overly excited about for Devy purposes, for drafting, in the NFL and things like that. So it's not necessarily that I hate the player. I just think that the hype's getting a little too wild when it's all said and done. And that's my faller, like he already talked about, so we don't have to talk about my faller anymore. I just think that he's at QB 13 right now in ADP. Andy has him a little bit higher than that even. I'm sure I just talked with Du Bois on Kevin Coleman from Devy Royale, and he drafted Cameron Ward in our C2C league, and he drafted him pretty early. I'll have to go back and look at like what QB actually drafted him at, but it was fairly early. Now it's the Campus to Canton, so like it's a little different because he's actually going to get those points and all that kind of stuff. But I just think that it's the hype's getting a little too wild there.
Yeah, it's understandable.
Yeah, so why don't we go ahead and get into the player that we think will lose value, which obviously. Gain value. The player that we think will gain value. Obviously, we just talked about my player that
nice
I think will lose. Yeah, thank you. And so I started off with the favorite. Why don't you go ahead and start us off here, buddy?
All right, so I initially was going to go with Seven McGee here, wide receiver converted from running back out of Oregon, but I made a last-second audible. I'm going with Travis Dye, who used to play at Oregon last year. He had a 64% backfield dominator a season ago with Oregon, and he's shown improvement every year since he came in 2018. So obviously this is going to be his 5th season, transferred to USC. He's going to be playing in that Lincoln Riley system as the presumed RB1. And I think that's just going to vault him up these draft boards. He had 1,200 yards, 16 touchdowns a season ago with 400 receiving yards and 2 TDs to go with that. Taking over for the previous Devy darling there, CJ Verdell, who obviously had some injuries issues and whatnot. But like I said, big threat in the receiving game. He's had 2 seasons above a 10% reception market share. His biggest knock is his size. He's only 5'10", 190 pounds, which is probably going to be a deal breaker for some NFL teams. But at his ADP of 178, RB 62, I'm definitely willing to take the risk because his analytic profile is there. Aside from the early declare, obviously this is going to be his 5th season, which you don't really worry about too much with running backs. Like running backs can stay and be fine. He's got the numbers, the receiving numbers. He's got the backfield dominator numbers. He's just lacking that size. He's going to be playing for an elite team. I think he could, potentially sneak into the back end of the third round next year.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, like you said, he had prolific numbers at Oregon, and it's not unbelievable to think that he can continue that at USC. I know he was picked for the Doak Walker Award watch list, and I guess that's not like necessarily saying he's going to be a stud or anything like that, but it just means that people are keeping an eye on him and kind of think the same way that you're thinking, and so. Did you mention his ADP or his ranking?
Yeah. RB 62. ADP is 178. So basically undrafted in Devy.
Yeah. So I mean, he can definitely rise pretty easily, and we see that all the time. Moving from certain teams to other teams, especially like somebody that's getting all of the fanfare that USC is getting right now. You can easily get more into the spotlight, and then get a pretty big gain in value there. I mean, even when you're that low, if he jumps from 62 to 42, like that's still a pretty substantial jump there,
Right.
So that brings me to mine, and honestly, I'm not gonna lie. Like I said, I didn't fall in love with any of these players, so I'm not trying to act like that this is like my favorite guy or anything like that. But I chose Taj Washington, another USC player, and I think that he was being hyped in the spring by Lincoln Riley, talking about how he was one of the most improved players, at least in the spring, and saying his suddenness and playmaking ability were apparent. He was an extremely hard worker. He's raw as a player, but rapidly improving. So those are things that I like to hear from a coach. And the thing is, it's not just like some random, freshman that we're just hoping is going to get better or whatever. He had 602 yards, 54 receptions, and a touchdown last year, which was second on the team. Now, he played more games than Gary Bryant and obviously Drake London as well. So I'm not saying that he's going to be this like stud. He's not going to take over for Mario Williams and Jordan Addison. I don't see that in his future. But if we're expecting that offense to be amazing and to take this huge step forward, they have opportunity for another receiver. And I think he could be that third receiver. And so right now, the reason why I chose him as my riser is because he's going as the wide receiver 116 in Devy. So, he could basically catch two balls and just about rise in the rankings. I kind of took the easy way out here, but I do actually believe in the player. Like, I think he could be drafted at some point. It's probably going to be pretty damn late. But he showed ability on not the best offense last year. So, I like what I saw last year, and then the fact that Lincoln Riley's already talking about him possibly being a playmaker and stuff like that. I think he has an opportunity to, be more in the limelight this year.
Yeah, I'll just start by saying I loved Taj Washington last year. I thought he was amazing when he was at Memphis, and then he announced that he was transferring to USC, and I loved him even more. I figured, okay, he's going to fill in for that Amon-Ra St. Brown role, who, had just left for the NFL. Drake London obviously ended up taking a ton of the targets there. But Taj had a great season. And, he could be the third receiver there. You might be right. But it could also be Gary Bryant. It could also be Jerry Rice's son, Brendan Rice. Yeah. Like Kevin's saying in the chat right now, there's like 50 receivers. He's saying there's 22 wide receivers on the depth chart. There's a ton of guys. So, it's like you said, the ADP is like nothing. So you're not really gambling that much. And it's going to be a high volume offense because I imagine their defense is going to be giving up points left and right. So, if you can get a piece of the pie anywhere, I guess, try and go for it. But I don't have too much faith in Taj Washington right now, which disappoints me because I really, really loved him last year.
Yeah, and I mean, it's probably more of a C2C play than Devy, honestly, but I really struggled as I was looking through the ranks and seeing like who I actually thought was going to rise in value. Like, I have a lot of players, I'm looking, and there was probably 5 players in a row where I'm like, all right, I have him here, let me look at ADP, and they were even. Like, well, I can't really say that I feel like he's gonna rise, so it just really was really tough the way that it worked out. Not to say that I don't like certain players, but Yeah, so I went with Taj here. Actually, I think he might still be available in that C2C that Kevin is in. So I might have just screwed myself, although it sounds like he's not the biggest believer either. So I'll probably be okay. It's okay. Actually, I'm up. I'm on the clock as we speak, and I have 2 picks in a row. So maybe I'll just go ahead and take Taj right now.
Better grab him.
I'm about to.
It would be John holding up the show or holding up a draft to do a pod. It's very much like you.
Oh yeah, they said they like added me and said, hey, you're on the clock, and he's got that dog in him. I love it. But
Shout out.
yeah, they added me and said I'm on the clock, and I'm like, boys, I'm on a pod. So
well, I guess we could jump into players that we think are going to lose value, and I'll just get mine out of the way quick here because I already mentioned him earlier in the show, and that's Tavian Thomas from Utah. Already talked about his ridiculous touchdown rate, 10%. It's guaranteed to regress. They bring in a 4-star freshman, Jalen Glover, who I think will see a little bit of run this year. I also liked Ricky Parks last year. I'm not really hearing much news about him. He's a redshirt freshman, obviously, this year. I think he could potentially see a bit of run. And then, obviously, Micah Bernard is back, who had 500 yards a season ago. So I think there's a lot of mouths to feed just in that backfield. And then obviously I talked about Cameron Rising this year. I think he's going to get some of those rushing touchdowns. I think he's going to, they're going to utilize the pass game a lot more. And Thomas's price isn't like exorbitant. Right now he's at ADP 83, RB 31. But I think there's better guys behind him. And I was just looking at the Campus to Canton ADP from like 84 to 100, the guys behind him. I think there was only like 3 guys that I'd have taken Thomas before. So 13 guys behind him just in the top 100 that I think are better than Thomas. So I'm kind of out on him. I think, if you're going to take him in a C2C draft just for some touchdown upside, then that's fine. But I wouldn't be expecting any sort of NFL potential there.
Yeah, I agree with you. He has nice size, which is, obviously works well for looking at the NFL. But, when it's all said and done, like he had 0.166 receptions per game. So like receiving is not a part of his game at all. We already talked about his touchdown rate, which is just wild. So we don't expect that to continue. And, I've mentioned it probably like 3 times on this pod. So you can clearly tell that I care about the stat or the metric. But, one of the things I look at is the big time run rate, and he had a 4.3% big time run rate. So like he's not getting those big explosive plays. So if he's not scoring touchdowns, he's probably not scoring you a lot of points when it's all said and done. So I really don't mind that at all. I don't know where he's going in ADP, but I think I'm perfectly fine with calling him a faller, honestly.
Yeah, 83 by the way, RB 31.
Actually, that's exactly where I have him at RB 31. So
really?
I don't know. Yeah, I literally have him at RB 30. I was looking at it right here.
So I was looking at the rankings. Like some of the freshmen, like Jamarian Miller, are behind him from Alabama. Which obviously the rankings, the ADP gets updated. I think Miller is probably going to be ahead of him.
Actually, I'm sorry. The list I'm looking at right now is just the list of players that played last year. So I don't have freshmen involved. So he's actually lower than 31.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a ton of freshmen that had ADP lower than him that I was like, I'd rather take a chance on one of them than take.
No, I agree. Yeah. So players that played last year, he's 31, but once you start throwing in those freshmen, he's probably 40 something, So yeah, right. I have no issues with him falling there. Nice. And we already talked about my faller. I think we've done a great job of talking about the Big Ten, the Pac-12. Hopefully the Pac-12 can continue on and prosper. We have no idea if that will actually happen or not. It was a lot of fun. We're going to continue this series and get into some of the other conferences here pretty soon in 2 weeks. And we will go ahead and do some previews. And obviously, Tommy T and Lucas will have some fun games and questions and all kinds of good stuff for us.
One thing I wanted to point out that I actually missed, so this is on me, is that Kirby Smart did sign a 10-year, $112.5 million extension at Georgia. Obviously, when you win the big game, this happens. Just quick, rapid thoughts from you two on the spot, because it was not on any show sheet on the matter. I want to start with Andy because you're already smiling over there.
I mean, I kind of was shocked to hear that it didn't happen sooner. Honestly, like you said, he won the big game. He's been there for the better part of a decade. So lock him in. SEC coach. He's shown that he can make the playoff multiple times. So yeah, it's kind of a non-story, I think, for me. Like, it was just sort of expected.
Yeah, I don't even actually follow college news nearly as much as Andy does. So even with that, it was not unexpected. It was not some big shock or anything like that. The dude's recruiting has been amazing. They have not been able to put together an offense necessarily, but it hasn't mattered. Their defense has just been so damn good. Sorry, that's not luck. Their recruiting has just been amazing, and obviously you win.
Except for at quarterback, they need to hit on one of those 5-star quarterbacks. I
guess I was really talking about defense, but yeah.
No, you're right. Yeah, I got you.
Yes, that recruiting has just been amazing on defense, and then you throw in a championship over Bama, and you're gonna get that extension every single time. It's just gonna happen.
100%. I just thought it was funny that, Andy, you and I had previously spoken about how the NIL deals are going to affect college football, and yet there's less chatter about a head coach going for $110, almost $111 million. Something interesting. Gentlemen, great program tonight. I want to lead with final thoughts before we get out of here.
John, I guess I'll go ahead and start. I really don't like the Pac-12. I think that's my final thought. It just as I was looking at these players and stuff, there's some 2024 players and 2025 players that I like, but they're just completely unproven. There's not that many proven players that I'm like, man, I really like, and I guess that's pretty normal for the Pac-12. But when I looked at the Big Ten and I'm trying to pick my players and everything, it was just very simple to choose who I liked, who I thought was going to rise, who I thought was going to fall. And then I got over the Pac-12 and I'm looking at my ranks, I'm looking at ADP, and I'm just like, no, I feel like this is pretty accurate.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing, just to piggyback off what you're saying, is it's the best Devy guys are on the teams that are leaving to the Big Ten. So, we've talked about it. The Pac-12 just feels like it's a dead conference at this point. We don't know what's going to happen. Unfortunately, you seem to get a new piece of news every single day as to who's going to go where. All we just have to do, all you can do is wait it out and see what happens. But yeah, outside of USC and maybe a couple guys on Oregon, there's not a lot to be excited about in that conference.
Definitely agree.
100%.
I knew it, but I really reiterated it when I started looking into it and researching tonight.
Yeah.
Lucas.
All right, I'm going to try to keep my soapbox here a little brief. I did find it very interesting that Kirby Smart came out with this contract, and earlier this week he was at a fundraiser and was saying that players getting $10,000 a month in their NIL deals is outlandish and people don't need to give them that much money. And then SEC media days are happening right now, and he's already come out there and said that kids don't need to be making this much money through NIL deals. So that's just a little fun random thought here. Another fun thing is just a lot of these players that you all chose today, they have so many counterparts that you can see just based off of their production, their size, their schools. And I find that very interesting. Like Braylon Allen, we were talking about Lindale White. Derrick Henry's a little bit of a stretch just because he's an absolute mammoth of a man, but so is Braylon Allen. And then talking about Travis Dye reminded me a lot of Kyron Williams, Marvin Harrison. It's not hard to think of the other Harrison. And then Rakeem Jarrett, thinking about Stephon Diggs and DJ Moore, both coming from Maryland recently as 5-star recruits whenever they got there. So there's a lot of similarities that I think can sometimes influence the way that we're looking at these players. And I think you all illustrated that very well with where you have them going in terms of value and future upside. So well done, guys.
Thank you, Lucas.
Absolutely phenomenal. Look, my final thoughts are always the same, but there are a couple little bits extra. Look, always the Full Tilt Dynasty Podcast Network is continuously trying to improve our content. You can let us know how by joining the Full Tilt Dynasty Podcast Network Discord, which is free for everyone. Coming up, we will have a Deebo Samuel signed jersey giveaway. You want to know how you can do that? Well, all you have to do is be a member of the Full Tilt Dynasty Podcast Network Discord channel. And this is where it gets interesting. There will be 2 12-team redraft leagues that will go on their own. This is free to enter. Winners of each redraft league will go head-to-head in a DFS showdown the week after Fantasy Football Championship. Winner takes all. We handle the shipping. We handle the cost no matter where you are, UK, Australia, no matter where you are in the world, we cover the cost. This is free to enter, and all you have to do is be in the Full Tilt Dynasty Podcast Discord. Links will be in the description. Gentlemen, I love this program. I love the setup. From myself at Tones Tipple FF, from Lucas at The Cute Hurts, from 2 hosts, which are they just have the beautifulest beards on the planet. This is at A Star FF, and of course at Dynasty Coach A. I want to remind everyone that clear eyes and full hearts can never lose, and your best days, well, they're always spent tilted. Good night, everybody.